Welcome to a special Next Round podcast with our speechwriting all-stars to provide commentary on President Trump's acceptance speech at the GOP convention. So we have Lance Izumi, Senior Director of Education and Chief Speechwriter to Governor Duke Duke-Majan and Attorney General Meese, Tim Anaya, who wrote speeches for Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger and top legislators in Sacramento, and I'm Rowena Itchon. I was a speechwriter for Governor Pete Wilson and was also a little research assistant in Ronald Reagan's speechwriting staff. So let's start off, guys, with the assassination attempt. So in the shadow of this assassination attempt, now there are rumors that President Biden is open to dropping out of the race. So President Trump's speech was going to get a lot of attention. So in that light, what are your initial impressions of his speech? Do you think that he had to do what he had to do given the political stakes? So I think I have a bit of a contrarian opinion here. I think with the assassination attempt, it was important to have the unity theme in his speech. But I think Biden would have done the same if the Democrat convention went first. It would have been unconscionable not to do so. But I think Trump had to do was to stay in command of the issues, play up his accomplishments, and look vigorous and charming, kind of a happy warrior, which I think he did. And he has this kind of conversational style speech, which I think plays up to his personality, but it doesn't give us a lot to work with as speech writing critics. He pretty much went on and on in his kind of casual conversational style, like he's at a donor's house and giving a fundraising event rather than a big convention center speech and lots of people watching on TV. But overall, yes, I think his speech was a success. What do you think, Lance?
Well, I think his speech was a success too, Ro. I thought that the speech went too long, but that's because he was ad-libbing a lot. And, you could tell where, he had his kind of more prepared remarks and where, he decided to do ad-libbing. Well, you do a lot of ad-libbing, you end up adding minutes to your speech. I remember when I was a speechwriter, I would oftentimes, give a 10 or 12-page speech to the person who was, I was writing for. And depending on the person, you might get back a 30-page transcript because there was a lot of ad-libbing. And that was kind of the way it was with President Trump last night. That having been said, however, that most important part of the speech was really that first 10 to 15 minutes where he talked about the assassination attempt. And really, when people look back on this speech, and I doubt that, a lot of people in the television audience anyway sat through the entire 90 minutes or so of the speech. But what they will remember is really that first 10 or 15 minutes where he talked about how he felt during the assassination, as the assassination attempt was being carried out against him. And I think that what he showed during that, the explanation of what he was going through and all the feelings he was feeling, plus the physical impact that the bullet had on him, he really showed himself to be human, to be vulnerable, and he was really changed by the experience. And and we knew that it really struck me when he said that he felt as though he shouldn't be here, meaning being here at the convention, because he really should be dead. And people at that convention and across America, I think, really reacted to that and reacted to him, in a very human sort of way. They were, somebody lives through that experience, and you see the person now not as a politician, not as a former president, not as somebody who wants to be president again, but you really see them as an ordinary human being going through this incredible life-changing experience. And I really think that that probably had as much an effect on people watching him give this speech than anything else in the rest of the speech. And I also think that when he went over to the fire chief's uniform, the fire chief Kamatatari, who was unfortunately killed during the attack, and then when President Trump kissed the fire chief's helmet and then asked for a moment of silence. I mean, I think that was such a moving part of that speech. And I think that, again, is what people are going to look at. It, spoke to the compassion that President Trump has really just as a human being all through the convention. You heard that from people. And I think that underscored, what others were saying about him, and he displayed that in person, during that segment of his speech. And I think that was very powerful, just as powerful as his own description of what happened to him. So I think that given all of that, I think that was really the main takeaway I had from his speech. And that is going to be a huge positive for people, when they think about him and his performance at this convention. Tim, what do you think?
Well, it certainly was the updated version of the Dickens novel. It was a tale of two speeches. And you're right, the first 15 minutes were very powerful, very moving. But I think much like we watched an assassination attempt on live TV a few days ago, well, we saw a train derailment live at the Republican National Convention. The rest of the Trump speech, which was over 92 minutes in length total, it felt like an eternity. It was actually excruciating to watch. I actually nodded off twice during the speech, and every time I woke up, it was still going forever after I woke up. I think that second part of the speech, it was really Trump at his worst. He was rambling, incoherent. He made boastful claims that were massively exaggerated. And there was obviously no thought really given to try to appeal to the broader public or the key voters in the swing states. It was a standard Trump rally on steroids. There's nothing special about it. There was no real strategy. Now, he may be proud of himself that he kind of got to do his thing his way, but I think if he loses the election, we're going to look back at this speech as when the house of cards began to tumble.
So, next question. President Trump avoided death by less than an inch only a few short days ago, and yet had to turn around and deliver his acceptance speech. So, how do you feel his quick recovery? How do you feel about his quick recovery in the immediate aftermath of the shooting and how it impacted his speech? And how well do you think President Trump addressed the assassination attempt in his speech and the convention overall? So I would have to agree with Lance, and maybe Tim. I think that the part where he described the assassination attempt and how he felt about it was the most interesting part of his speech. I think he was very sincere, even going into details like trying to figure out why there was so much blood. If you've been shot, I gotta believe that there's just tremendous shock that you might not even know where you've been hit or what's even happening. I like the way he described it. I liked his sincerity. As Lance said, he was very human. Yeah, there was a little bit of chest thumping, but you got to let that go. If a friend told me he was shot and told me the story 10 times for the next year, I'd probably listen to every single one and sympathize. That's what you do with your friends, and you have to make allowances for that. But I thought that was the far and the best part of his speech and the most interesting part of his speech. And he did the usual. He thanked the Protective Service, the Secret Service. It was also interesting that he commented on the crowd not panicking. We weren't there, so we would have had to rely on media coverage to show this. I think there'll be a lot of analysis going forward on why people didn't panic. Was it because it was over so fast? Was it because the crowd was brave and wanted to help catch the guy, as kind of Trump interpreted? Or were they just in shock too? I think it's going to be one for the history books. Lance?
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Ro. I thought there were several things that I thought about when I look further into that first part of the speech where he's talking about the assassination attempt. You alluded to this, but I thought that it was really great on his part that he was so magnanimous and complimentary to his own Secret Service detail. Now, we all know about the controversy going on about the role of the Secret Service in, preventing the shooting from taking place in the first place, and whether they did all that they could to protect President Trump. He knows that obviously that is all going on. Heck, the Republican senators cornered the Secret Service director at the convention to try and get answers to questions about that. But, in his speech, President Trump didn't bring up any of that at all. He was very magnanimous. He focused on the bravery of his Secret Service detail, thanked them, And I think that, was a really important thing that he did. I also think that when you look at the broader convention and you look at some of the speeches that were made about the president's attempted assassination on the president, I thought the one that stood out to me was actually Tucker Carlson's speech. And Tucker Carlson said that, he was like most Americans. He was shocked by what happened, and he ended up watching the video of what happened to President Trump, many, many times. And because, he was just transfixed by it, that this could be happening. And, unlike all of us, he is a friend of President Trump. So he, actually had a chance to talk with President Trump after this attempted assassination. And I thought what Tucker shared with the audience at the convention and with the viewing public was very interesting, because he told everybody that President Trump didn't talk about himself when he talked about the attempted assassination. He really, again, focused it on what the crowd did or what they did not, that they didn't panic. They were just there. They wanted to be supportive of both him and whoever else was shot there. And that, President Trump, didn't try to inflame or incite, emotions after the assassination attempt. And, even though, Tucker said it was a perfect opportunity for him to do so, if that's what he wanted. But instead, he wanted to, focus on other people, not on himself. And I thought that was a really great insight into the man's personality and his character at a time of great, obviously, personal trial for him, but also, potential catastrophe for the nation. And so I think that when we talk about unity and tamping down on things, his reaction after the assassination attempt, will go down, I think, in history as one of his great positives of, his time here. Tim, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. That first 15 minutes of the speech was really one of the most compelling moments we've ever seen at a national political convention. Now, his delivery and appearance, it was pretty normal, actually. He did look tired to me. He did look a little gray to me. He probably isn't able to get his spray tan treatments or whatever it is he puts on his face, obviously with a big wound in his ear, but all of that's understandable. I thought it was very poignant to see him go over and embrace the uniform of the fallen firefighter. And, that first 15 minutes was so powerful. That's why I'm so critical of the rest of the speech, because I think it really did kind of squander an opportunity that he had to really kind of spike the football, if you will. And so I think it will come down to, well, how many people watched, and did they watch the actual live coverage, or did they watch what they saw on the news? Because I think the news coverage will be dominated by the first 15 minutes. If people, what they take away from last night is those first 15 minutes, Donald Trump will have helped himself immensely. They saw, hours 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 of his speech. I think that may ultimately overshadow the very compelling and magnanimous first part of his speech. Join PRI on Saturday, September 21st at the Four Seasons Hotel Silicon Valley in East Palo Alto for our annual Sir Anthony Fisher Dinner, featuring this year's keynote speaker and Toby Family Freedom Prize recipient, Kimberly Strassel. You read her Potomac Watch column every week in the Wall Street Journal. You see her on TV in her regular appearances on Fox News Channel. And you read her best-selling books like The Biden Malaise. Now, come see her in person at a terrific evening supporting PRI. She'll discuss the 2024 election, what's going on in our nation's capital today, and the fundamental importance of civil liberties. Visit pacificresearch.org/events today to buy your tickets. While you're there, you can learn about sponsorship opportunities. We hope to see you on Saturday, September 21st. Tickets are selling fast, so visit pacificresearch.org/events today to secure your spot.
So, in the immediate aftermath of the shooting, both Presidents Trump and Biden expressed their desire to lower the temperature and not use the extreme rhetoric toward their opponents that some argue inspired the shooter. President Trump even said that he ripped up his speech and had a completely new draft written to focus on unity. So, how well do you think Trump did as far as delivering a unifying speech? Do you think the convention overall did a good job of setting aside partisanship in favor of a more hopeful message? Well, I think there is a difference between, partisan red meat language, which I actually think that, and when you're in the biggest GOP meeting over the last 4 years, the big election, why not use red meat language? This is the forum to do it. Yeah, dish it out again and again. But I think in the last decade or so, I think you guys would agree with me that there's been a lot of coarse, distasteful, offensive rhetoric in politics. And I mean, as a woman, it's especially offensive to me. And it kind of gives elections the ick factor. So partisan red meat, yeah, go for it. I've written speeches like that myself, but mean and coarse and personal and nasty, no, thank you, Lance.
Well, I think that President Trump did do well in terms of tamping down the rhetoric, turning down the temperature, whatever you want to call it. I mean, first of all, I mean, he didn't mention except once President Biden by name, just referred to the current administration. And so he certainly lowered the temperature that way. He didn't focus on his opponent. He also did that by not really blaming his opponents for creating the atmosphere that may have resulted in him in this assassination attempt. I mean, and then pointing out all the things that have been said about him during the past years, comparing him to terrible people in history. The worst people in history, and that that he was an existential threat to democracy, all kinds of things. He didn't do that, and so by not doing that, he certainly lowered the temperature or kept the temperature lowered. And I think finally, just his general demeanor, his tone of voice, it was subdued, and his delivery was much more measured than it is like, in maybe one of his outdoor rallies where, obviously there's a lot more energy going on and he's maybe pounding the pounding the podium. And instead, I mean, it was more conversational. And I think just that lowered tone, I think, reduced the temperature level. So I think all that in combination, I think he did a good job of, presenting a much, I mean, at least comparatively or relatively speaking, a much more mellow President Trump. Tim, what do you think?
Well, it was advertised a lot in the media coverage in the run up to the speech that he tore up the initial speech to, have a new one written about unity. And as we mentioned, the first 15 minutes of the speech were very moving and unified. But I think given the length of his speech, well, he might have actually given both speeches, the new unity speech and the old speech. Maybe it wasn't a well done speech. Maybe the temperature was lowered to medium. But I think overall, the convention, for the most part, toned things down. It actually was very well produced. There were a lot of compelling speakers, both famous politicos and real people. And I thought they prosecuted the case against Biden really in kind of nonpartisan ways that would appeal to Americans of all political stripes. I'm thinking, specifically the Gold Star families, for example. And, yes, at a convention, you have to have some of the crazies, give their talks. And so you saw cuckoos like Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene and people like that. They were largely confined to the speaking slots where no one was watching. But I think, it's ironic when you look at it overall, was the looking at those entire 92 minutes. And I think all of us who hung in there maybe should get T-shirts or something that we survived the Donald Trump convention speech shirts. Will they come away thinking that this is someone who maybe their outlook on life has changed? Maybe they are looking at things differently now that they have survived such a close brush with death. And I don't know. That's why I keep going back to, I think that second part of the speech really, r really, it may have overshadowed how effective that first 15 minutes was, and that feeling of unity, and that feeling, that spirit of togetherness, that he really articulated in the first part. Time will tell, but I think having that kind of, hour plus of kind of wildly riffing, I think that may have largely undone what really was a good appeal to unity in the new part of his speech. So we'll see in the coming days as the polling data comes out and the focus group data comes back. But that's where I'm at on it. That it's that tale of two speeches. I think that second part of the speech really overshadowed that appeal to unity.
So we don't know for sure as of this taping if President Trump will indeed face President Biden in November, but it's clear that regardless of who the Democrats nominate, the election will again be decided by tens of thousands of voters in a few key Midwestern and Sunbelt states. So how do you think President Trump did in trying to reach the key voters who will end up deciding the election, namely these double negatives who don't like either candidate, and suburban Republican leaning female voters? So why don't I take on that Republican leaning female voter? I've got five friends. All I would say they're Democrats and Republicans, but none of them are progressives and none of them are far right. They're all sort of centrist and they're well informed, smart gals. I doubt if any of them watched the entire speech, maybe watched a little bit of it, but I'm sure that they all looked at the headlines and read a few stories. And I think that yeah, and we discussed this. They're all as we call them double negatives. They're not crazy about either candidate. But I think if Trump had picked a Nikki Haley or a DeSantis or a Rubio, I think he might have swung a few of them to vote for him, but he didn't. And I think JD Vance is probably not someone they know very well. He's relatively new to politics. I think his best course was to have picked someone that moderates know and that have a long record. I think he might have swung them over. But the question now is, does he need to? His poll numbers are pretty solid to me. I think it's a slam dunk, Lance.
Yeah, well, I think, Ro, if you look at not just Trump's speech, but you look at the convention in general, I think what the convention was very effective in doing was really humanizing Donald Trump. I mean, you look at, the people that they had speaking. I mean, you had, President Trump's granddaughter, who I thought just gave a great speech, who was, very poised, but, really spoke from her heart about who Donald Trump was and is as her grandpa, as she said, the person who gives her soda and candy when her parents aren't looking. And I thought that how she handled that big moment in terms of telling about their personal relationship, I think was really important for people to understand. People have said, that, and I think Laura Trump and others have said in interviews that, when you're assassinating somebody, you're not just assassinating a political leader. You're assassinating somebody who's a father, a grandfather, etc. But when you have somebody like President Trump's granddaughter who is then telling you, how she felt when she first heard about the assassination attempt, I think that really does humanize the individual, who is, being attacked. And I think that has a real impact on people who are independents, who are these suburban Republican leaning female voters and others, that, this person is a human being and that these are his positive qualities that he shows to his family. And I think that that also came through in the speeches by the Gold Star families and the families of the crime victims, and who emphasized, how President Trump has real empathy, real compassion for them. He's met with them. He's, carved out time. He, has researched their stories about the people who have been lost in their lives, whether it's in war or through crime. Like that, President Trump has actually taken that time to get to know them and to then have this consideration for all of them. I think that humanizes him. And in his speech, again, his emphasis on how he felt when he was shot, I think all of these things go to humanize him. And this humanization, I think, really improves his chances when it comes to people who may have been on the fence with him, maybe have heard all these terrible stories, in the mainstream media, and then they find out as the that model, I think her name is Rose, who came up there and said that she was able to find out what the real Donald Trump was, and then found out that that was not what the a real person, that the one, not the person that the media had portrayed, but there was another Donald Trump who was a much more positive, good person than he's been made out to be. And I think the fact that after the convention, Fox had a panel of undecided voters, and they all heavily leaned towards Trump after this convention. And I think that therefore the convention was a success, in that it's going to have a positive effect on these undecideds who are going to be very important to the outcome of this election. Tim, what do you think?
Well, I disagree. I think again, that second part of his speech was such a hot mess and such a lost opportunity to take command of the race. And I think if he had been more disciplined in the rest of his speech, actually reading the text rather than, doing his, Shecky Green impersonation, riffing and, droning on and on, it actually would have gone down as one of the more memorable and effective speeches in recent convention history. And I think those swing voters were open to giving Donald Trump a chance, especially in the wake of the assassination attempt. And I think the rest of the convention, especially the Gold Star families and the crime victims' families and speakers like Nikki Haley, really appealed to these voters. But I think Trump undid a lot of that goodwill with his second part of his speech. And I think he actually reminded them why they don't like him in the first place and why they're leery about signing up for another 4 years of him as president. And I think rather than winning them over to the Trump camp, which he had the opportunity to do, I think they remain up for grabs for Democrats, assuming Democrats can actually nominate an actual alive candidate. Now, I think it's obvious from this Trump speech that he just is unable to be disciplined. He can't help himself. And that lack of discipline, I think, in the process, he actually hurt himself some and probably let the Democrats back in the game when he had the opportunity to essentially end the election with a more disciplined speech. We'll get back to next round in just a moment, but first, are you getting PRI's regular email updates? If not, go to pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get the facts you need to fight back delivered every week to your inbox. Every week, PRI sends you what you need to know about what's going on in Washington, D.C. and Sacramento, and gives you the free market ideas needed to save our state and our nation. By going to pacificresearch.org and clicking the sign up button, you can sign up to have Policy Alert, our weekly roundup of all the best ideas from PRI scholars delivered to your inbox. Or you can sign up for event updates so you're the first to know when PRI is coming to your community with great events. So sign up now at pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get PRI's content delivered to your inbox each week.
So survey after survey says that the top issues in the election are inflation, the economy, and immigration. So how do you rate President Trump's efforts, both in his speech and throughout the convention, promote his own record in these issues and prosecute the case against the Biden administration? Well, I disagree with Tim. I actually thought he did a fairly good job at discussing his own record and the disasters of the Biden administration. I thought he was disciplined for Trump, actually, because I've seen him give other speeches, rally speeches. He could be all over the place. I think if you look at his old speeches and look at his current performance based on those old speeches, I think he was not bad. I was able to follow it. I think he hit all of the right issues, and even showed a little bit of vision of the future. I don't necessarily agree with all of that vision, but I think he did a pretty good job for Donald Trump. Lance, what do you think?
Well, I think he was effective in discussing these key topics. I'm not going to say that that speech might not have been better if it had been a bit shorter, but I will say that I thought that when it came time to talking about these key topics, subjects that the American people are concerned about, such as immigration or the economy, inflation, I thought he was effective. I mean, take for example, when he was talking about immigration. I mean, I thought one of the best parts of the speech was when he put up the chart on immigration, the chart that actually saved his life, because he turned his head. And if you remember at the speech, slightly in order to look up at the chart, because he wanted to point out this, chart on how under his administration, illegal immigration had gone way down. And so I thought that his discussion of that, was able to combine both an effective explanation of why a return to an administration headed by him would be more effective than the current administration's policy. But also then again, he was able to use that assassination attempt to again humanize himself and get people to feel something about him that they might not have felt before. I also think too that if you look at the convention as a wider entity, then and you look, for example, at the speakers, I think that they were very well chosen in order to underscore why President Trump's policies would be more effective for the American people. And like, for example, when Ann Thunder, who was the mom of the 15-year-old boy who died of fentanyl poisoning, and she blamed President Biden's open borders policy and said that a return to President Trump would seal the borders, protect, prosecute drug dealers, and then stop communist China from poisoning our children. I mean, her speech was, I thought, particularly effective when it came to the immigration issue. So, I think that both Trump's speech and also the combination with some of these other speakers, I thought was very effective. And I think that he of course reminded people about how inflation and the economy were much better off under him. So I thought that overall it was effective. So Tim, what do you think?
Well, I printed up the Trump speech this morning, which was 14 pages, by the way, so I'm glad I put new ink cartridges in my printer. And I wanted to see and read for myself, how did he discuss policy in the speech? And these were a few things that I noted here. Okay, here was his appeal to Wisconsin. By the way, Wisconsin, we're spending over $250 million here, so I hope you'll remember this November and give us your vote. I'm trying to buy your vote. On jobs and illegal immigrants. By the way, you know who's taking the jobs that are created? 107% of these jobs are taken by illegal aliens. Okay, here's the thing about the border or about the chart, which, okay, I get the humanization part, but listen to what he actually said. But you can see on the chart that saved my life. I said, look at it. I'm so proud of it. I think it's one of the greatest. It was done by the Border Patrol. One of the greatest charts I've ever seen. It showed everything just like that. The chart. Oh, there it is. That's pretty good. Wow. And then this is something on illegal immigrant crime. Has anyone seen The Silence of the Lambs, the late great Hannibal Lecter? He'd love to have you for dinner. That's insane asylums. They're emptying out their insane asylums. Well, if you can make any sense of those quotes, good luck to you. I think it's one of the main ongoing criticisms with Trump as a speaker, and it was one of my main criticisms at the debate. When you don't prepare, when you don't prioritize policy, when you don't have command of basic fact nuggets about your administration's record and what your opponent is doing, you present a mess like this. These kind of wild boasts, these exaggerated claims. He says, every disaster we're enduring will be fixed, and it will be fixed very, very quickly. Well, what does that mean? How? So I think, again, yeah, he mentioned all these policy points, but I think it was a very poor and in many cases kind of wild and exaggerated way in which he talked about the issues. I agree that the rest of the convention did a much more effective job in prosecuting the case and prosecuting the case in a way where you could have people across the party spectrum agree on the issues. But I thought Trump did a terrible job in his speech prosecuting the case on policy.
So, as former speechwriters, we know that a good speech is not only well delivered, but also well written. Aside from how good or bad he delivered his remarks, how do you rate Trump's speech as a written document? Well, I thought the best part of the speech, of course, I think we've talked about this, was his description of being shot at. That wasn't the stuff of Hyde rhetoric. It didn't have to be. And only he could have written that portion of the speech. I have no doubt that his speechwriters are good. And it was probably a more tightly written speech. But I think Trump can't help himself. I don't think he's all that comfortable with a script. So he ad libs a lot. I think he looks at his speech as more like a not talking points, but really talking paragraphs where he can glance at it and use it if he wants to. So, yeah, he went on, especially thanking all of those people who introduced him and made a comment or two about Crazy Nancy. That's vintage Trump, too. So, I don't think it's fair to grade his speechwriters on the actual end product, especially with someone like President Trump. But I'm sure his speechwriters wrote this particular part, and I thought it was very effective in the end. I think it was his best line. I'll quote it. Quote, "For too long, our nation has settled for too little. We've given everything to other nations, to other people. You've been told to lower your expectations and to accept less for your families. I'm here tonight with the opposite message. Your expectations are not big enough. They're not big enough at all. It is a time to start expecting and demanding the best leadership in the world, leadership that is bold, dynamic, relentless, and fearless. We can do that." So I think he's onto something there that people have come to reduce their expectations. I see that everywhere I go. It's in for young people. They believe that it's impossible to own their own house. For with the working class, it's almost impossible to become middle class. People think that the government is incompetent. It's no longer working. I see that everywhere, and I like that end message. It was a great message of hope, Lance.
Yeah, I think that I mean I agree with you, Ro. I mean I've alluded to this, in the previous questions and answers that the written document is much different than the delivered document, and so as speechwriters, we produce a text for the person for whom we are writing, but it's up to them to deliver it in the way that they feel comfortable. And as I pointed out, some of the people that I've written for, were very much like President Trump and would ad lib a lot. And so that's the person, and that's their personality, and that's how they like to deal with their speeches. So you have to just, work with that. And I think that, I would agree with you, Ro, that in terms of that one of the best lines is really the line that you quoted. And, that when he said that line, it kind of reminded me, it was almost kind of a Ronald Reagan type of line, because, if you think about the 1980 election when, Jimmy Carter was president, that, Jimmy Carter had basically told the American people that we have to live in a time of lowered expectations, that we have a general malaise, in America, and that's the new norm, the new normal. And Ronald Reagan comes along and says that no, that's not right. That America is a great country, is the shining city on the hill. That it is a place where boldness and bigness are part of the American character. And I think that line that you quoted, Ro, really does speak to that, and to that juxtaposition of what President Trump is advocating and how he ended that speech, underscored that ideal, and put in a negative light, what we've been living with over the last 3.5 years. So I think that as a scripted line was very, very effective, and I think it's going to be it was one of his best lines in the speech. Tim, what do you think?
Well, I actually felt bad for a speechwriter. We've all been in situations where we know we've written a pretty good speech, and then we become pretty deflated when we hear the person we wrote the speech for deliver it and deliver it pretty poorly. Going through the 14 pages of the transcript of this speech, now it's hard. You have to kind of go through and try to dissect, well, what was actually written by the speechwriter and what were the riffs. But I think if you throw out the obvious riffs, it actually was a pretty well written speech. And I think it could have been a pretty effective speech if only Trump were able to be more disciplined. I think it's just another case of where, the 92-minute riff overshadowed any well-written prose on the paper.
So let's look at the speech from President Trump's running mate, Ohio Senator JD Vance. They say that vice presidents don't really help a ticket, but they can certainly hurt it. So, how well do you think Senator Vance did in his introduction to the American people? And how effective a job do you think he did in selling what is now the Trump Vance ticket? Well, I actually read his book, Hillbilly Elegy, and I thought it was a very good book. From all reports I read of him, he's a very, very smart guy. I wish he was a little less protectionist, less isolationist. I wish Milton Friedman or Ronald Reagan was around to have dinner with him. But I think he did a good job in advancing the Trump agenda. It's too bad that it's not a more limited government agenda or an agenda that takes more leadership in the world. Overall, I think his speech was a good one. He struck the right tone. And his delivery was natural, comfortable, and confident, Lance.
Well, yeah, I think that when I was listening to his speech, now I had never really heard him give a speech before. I've seen him interviewed on television, and but you only get small snippets of that. And I actually had never read his book or seen the movie. I actually didn't know a whole lot about him. I just knew a real thumbnail, and so it was really a blank canvas, and I was kind of waiting for him to paint on it. And the first thing that struck me was that I thought that the delivery of his speech was kind of pedestrian. It wasn't really exciting. And so, but then as he continued to give his speech, the thing that struck me was that, well, yes, he's not the most exciting and scintillating speaker in the world. But on the other hand, what comes across that he is a very authentic person and very genuine. And I think that, Tucker Carlson in his speech previously said that JD Vance was one of the most decent politicians he'd ever met in Washington, D.C., and actually one of the most decent that he'd ever come across. And actually, I think that, that kind of unexciting type of delivery kind of underscored the man's decency and authenticity. And at the end of the speech, I was much more impressed by that than my initial feeling of the lack of excitement. I think that he did a good job of talking about his background, and I think his working class background will help him, especially help the ticket with key constituencies. I mean, his focus on how globalism pillaged his hometown and other American towns like his, and how the ordinary people, working people in those towns, were adversely affected by Wall Street and multinational corporations who went to offshore things, and that ended up having a negative impact on people in his communities. I think that's going to have an impact in a lot of these Midwestern swing states. And I noted that he reached out to union members. He when he talked about American workers, he said that, and these include both union and non-union. And when you then combine that with the fact that the president of the Teamsters gave a speech at the Republican convention, that I think that really underscored how the Republican Party is now reaching out to a totally different type of constituency that they had written off previously, and that the party was no longer simply the shill for big business, that it was much more a big tent party, as President Trump and others have been trying to grow it. So I think that's really an important thing that could end up helping their ticket in the end, especially in places like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And I think lastly, I think what was really effective, again, in showing the type of person he is that he pointed out his mother, who had been addicted to drugs until a decade ago, and now she's been clean for 10 years. And when if he is able to win the vice presidency, that in January, it will be almost exactly 10 years that she's been sober. So I think that was a very human moment, and I think a very effective moment to introduce him to the American people. Tim, what do you think?
Well, I agree with a lot of that. I think overall, compared to the Trump speech, JD Vance delivered the Gettysburg Address. And I think it was actually, pretty well written, though, again, to kind of go behind the curtains. A lot of these speeches where you know a big speech is coming up, but you don't know who it's for, like for the State of the Union response. There's a speechwriter actually writing kind of a dummy speech that you then pour the syrup of that person's record and agenda and personality over it when you have the person. And obviously, some of that was at play here. I think that his inexperience delivering a major speech showed, he was probably too fast with his delivery, and he was affected when the crowd would begin to respond. And a lot of that is due to the fact that when you deliver a speech crisply, and you effectively deliver the applause lines, people will respond at the right time. But when you don't, you kind of get interrupted at weird little spots like Vance was kind of the wrong times during his speech. I agree with Lance, the thing about his mom, if you've read the book or watched the movie, that it's shocking to see his mom's even alive and in relatively good shape, let alone actually at a convention cheering on her son. When you read the book or watch the movie, you see how she treated him and the rest of the family horribly when she was more of an addict. I agree with Roe about the policy. On the point about unions, let's hope he maintains his commitment to worker freedom, unlike people like Senator Hawley, who have, gone against right to work legislation and other worker freedom measures. I think the only reason he was picked, of course, was to appeal not to the whole country, but to Wisconsin, Ohio, and Michigan. And I think if you view his presentation in that light, there's probably something for voters in all three of those states to like about JD Vance. JD Vance is going to basically be living in those three states during the campaign, and I think he has a personal story and an agenda that appeals to voters in those three states, and as we saw on the convention stage. We'll get back to our terrific interview in just a moment, but first, PRI's YouTube channel is must watch. By visiting youtube.com/Pacific Research 1, that's the number 1, you can watch webinars, videos, and other original content, including our new Free City Center video tours and interviews. You can watch as PRI's Wayne Weingarten tours Dignity Moves, a San Francisco nonprofit that is reimagining scalable solutions to homelessness with founder and CEO Elizabeth Funk. And you can check out Stephen Greenhut's tour of a proposed new city in rural Solano County that has generated significant interest and intrigue. You can even listen to previous episodes of Next Round Podcast. So visit PRI's YouTube channel today at youtube.com/Pacific Research 1, that's the number 1, and click the subscribe button to receive notifications about our latest content as soon as it's posted.
So aside from the two main speeches, what speaker or moment at the Republican convention do you think was especially interesting or compelling or noteworthy? This can either be a positive moment or a negative moment. So for me, she didn't speak much, but I like that Usha Vance got up and gave a speech, JD Vance's wife. She said a few words. I think it kind of maybe mitigate some of the progressive agenda, which is always to brand conservatives as racist, white male privilege. Well, JD Vance, if you read his book, grew up far from privilege, and he married an Indian woman who grew up right here in California, in San Diego, I've read. So I'm looking forward to learning more about her, Vance.
Well, there are a couple of things that really stood out to me, outside of, President Trump's speech and Senator Vance's speech. First of all, the speeches by the Gold Star families, these families who lost service members killed in the Kabul suicide bombing at the, disastrous exit of the United States, from Afghanistan. I mean, that to me was both effective, and it really affected me in a very personal way. Because you had two family members of the Marine Sergeant Nicole G, who spoke. I actually attended the public service for Sergeant G in Roseville, which is a suburb outside of Sacramento. And, when I heard the relatives of Sergeant G speak at that public service in Roseville, and I saw her pictures and all the floral displays, commemorating her. And it was so emotional to be at that service and to hear about the incredible service member that she was, and also the incredible young woman and leader that she was, from both her family and friends, and to think that her life was taken in that disastrous situation, that she really should be alive today. And instead, we were having the family and then the community was having this service in her memory. It just tore up my heart, but it also really angered me that this had happened to her and to the others who were killed on that terrible day at the end of the U.S. Commitment to Afghanistan. And, to hear the relatives of Sergeant G then, say that, point out what everybody knows, that, President Biden had not, really reached out to them, and had not really, bothered to really learn anything about their loved ones who were killed. I mean, it's both tragic, but then also in comparison, when they talked about how President Trump had the family members over at Bedminster in New Jersey, and actually, sat with them and talked with them for hours, and knew the stories of each and every one of their loved ones who were lost in Afghanistan, and was able to give them that type of compassion and empathy and sympathy that they wanted, and he was able to give them. And you heard one of Nicole G's relatives say that she thought President Trump, initially she expected to see an arrogant politician, and it turned out that he was exactly the opposite. And I think that was a very moving part of the convention. And the other thing that I would say is that Madeleine Brame, whose son was stabbed to death in New York City, and she excoriated Alvin Bragg, the DA in New York, for not taking the killers to trial. And she said that she had voted for Democrats for 45 years. And for what? The Democrats had literally stabbed her in the back, just about. And that, again, just like the Gold Star families, Donald Trump actually reached out to her and was kind and compassionate and caring and understanding, and, and really wanted to give her that sympathy that she really wanted. And that has totally changed her view and changed her heart. I thought those two things in combination were unbelievably powerful, just generally, but also for me personally. Tim, what do you think?
Yep, I completely agree. Normally I'm one to criticize what I call the human props in the State of the Union speech. Well, the Republicans really showcased a lot of these regular people on the stage and actually in the key primetime viewing slots, and it was incredibly effective here. And I think, perhaps the best speeches and the best moments of the convention were the regular people being showcased. I think all the people Lance mentioned, I agree. I also love that they brought in some of the frat bros from the University of North Carolina who guarded the flag in the face of the anti-American mob that was on campus. So really powerful stuff from the real people at this convention.
So last question. If President Biden ultimately drops out of the race, how effective do you think the Trump speech and the rest of the convention were in setting up the Republican ticket to defeat whomever they might face in November? Well, I think the speech was right for the current time. The unity theme was necessary. He did a good job in citing his accomplishments and his vision, and he looked dynamic and in charge. All these things work with a race against Biden. I think if it turns out to be Kamala Harris, well, that's a no-brainer in my opinion. I think Trump has got that, and that one's sewn up. It'll be a landslide. Anybody else, I think his speechwriters and his team will have to craft a new strategy. What do you think, Lance?
Yeah, I think that his speech overall, and the rest of the convention, combined, I think it was very effective. I mean, Karl Rove, who's no fan of President Trump's, actually said at the end of the convention convention that it was one of the best Republican conventions that the Republican Party had ever put on. And I agree with him. I think that it was a highly effective convention. I mean, there was a great deal of unity there. I mean, not just in the speeches, but actual unity. I mean, they brought in Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, and people who had been critical of President Trump, who have been his adversaries, and everybody was basically in under the one big Republican tent. So I think that in that sense, I think that they're going to be a very strong party going forward, regardless of whomever the Democrats decide to put forward, whether it's President Biden or somebody else. They'll have to pivot, depending on if President Biden is switched out for somebody. But I think that, regardless, I think they're going to be in a strong position, given both, again, the unity of the party, and I think also the strength of the ticket. I think the ticket is very strong, and I think it will have a very strong chance of prevailing in November. What do you think, Tim?
Well, it's the big question, of course, and obviously we're in uncharted territory, so it's really unclear how much you could have hedged your bets in the convention programming. It was obviously watching from home. There was a lot of confidence on display, a lot of strutting around in Milwaukee. And yes, you did see some rhetoric of the Biden-Harris administration, but really the convention was all about prosecuting the record against Joe Biden. There really wasn't much talk about the other names that you hear being floated as potential backup candidates. So, at the end of the day, the Republicans are obviously betting that if someone other than Biden runs against Trump, that candidate will be tied to the hip by Trump, by the Trump ticket and the other Republican surrogates during the campaign. So, yes, they have a lot of faith in the ticket. We'll see how it is if indeed a change is actually made in the coming days.
Well, thanks, Tim and Lance, and thanks for everyone for listening. And stay tuned for our commentary on Biden's speech, or whoever it's going to be, during the Democrat convention in a few weeks. Bye. If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Itchon. Hope you'll come back again for next round with PRI.